Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It is Tuesday, June 17th, and episode 416, and we're going to talk about economics and morality. So all the war rhetoric, it's almost dizzying, really. Uh, Yeah, there are a lot of videos of damage, missile attacks, and whatnot, and it's hard to know if you've seen this before from a different angle or if it's fake or whatever, and it's hard to really distinguish in these early days. But suffice to say that it looks like Israel is getting pounded as much as they are dishing out. But of course, Israel has a disadvantage, and that is the United States is the one supplying them with weapons, and America just does not have the capacity to produce the weapons that it needs, especially since the United States is supposed to be supplying Ukraine with lots of weapons, and everyone seems to have forgotten that war pretty quickly. Israel seems to do that a lot. They did that before as well early on in the war, so that was kind of interesting. On the other hand, you have China and Russia supplying Iran with weapons. Of course, they made agreements. It was very much publicized, Russia doing agreements with Iran. And then when the United States was Trump was making all these uh, lame ultimatums to Iran at the request of Israel, making it seem like he wants peace, but in reality, he's planning a sneak attack. So Russia even offered to take all of the, what is it, nuclear material, radioactive material, um, that they can do that. It'd be not a problem. And of course, China gets 98% of its oil from Iran. So both of those countries have a vested interest in Iran and they're going to support them. The very fact that Iran has hypersonic missiles means that they bought them from China or Russia or both. Um, and this should have been part of the calculus of war, right? Before Netanyahu and Trump decided to start bombing Iran, that should have been part of the calculation. What happens if we do that? But I don't know. Either that wasn't considered, which shows how incompetent they are as leaders, or they didn't really care. It doesn't matter. America, Trump, because of the military industrial complex, and Netanyahu, because a prison cell is awaiting him. And so if there's no war, or if his party loses control of the Israeli parliament, then he's going to jail. And so he needs to perpetuate this war just so that he can stay out of jail. All of us now have to deal with war, so he doesn't have to go to jail. Send him to jail, man. It's not that difficult. All those people who are dying and suffering, scared out of their minds, if you ask them, they would say, "Yeah, yeah, Netanyahu, just send him into jail, and all of this will end." Another thing to consider also is BRICS, right? They're moving away from the dollar, and this will shove it away from the dollar. In addition to that, you have the yen carry trade, right? So why the BRICS are dumping the dollar because the whole system that the dollar operates is unstable. It's falling apart. And one of those pieces is the yen carry trade. Monaco64 was talking about it this morning. He included a simplified explanation of what the yen carry trade is supposed to be. I've mentioned it before, and basically what it is the way that Japan blew its bubble was that they would deliberately try to weaken the yen, against other currencies. And so people will borrow yen, right? So lend money to the government, but they'll borrow the yen, excuse me, they'll borrow the yen, but they'll get the yen in the form of dollars or other currency, which they then use to invest in those other countries. Because the interest rate was so low on the yen, it was worth it. It was profitable for people to borrow yen and then spend the yen in other countries as for investments, right? And so that difference in interest and earning capacity, that arbitrage, I guess is what you would call it, that difference there is what made the yen carry trade really worth it. Obviously, in order to make it worthwhile, you have to, we're talking about trillions of dollars, right? So I believe Monaco 64 used the term quadrillion, which is the next after trillion, uh, which, we're talking about insane levels of currency. And so if the war is going to speed up the unwinding of the yen carry trade, right? Because interest rates in Japan are rising, which makes the value of the carry trade go down. In other words, people are going to suffer losses as a result. And because they can't tolerate those losses, they're going to unwind the yen carry trade. But at the same time, you have inflation in the United States, which allows the yen to become even stronger, which forces more people to unwind the trade. In addition to that, Japan depends completely on imports when it comes to oil, right? And so this war with Iran will have far greater impact and influence than people probably have calculated. And all of this should have been calculated prior to this attack. And if they did make this calculation, then they would realize that war is really not a very good option. It's probably something which should not be pursued. And Trump should have said, well, this will ruin the United States economy, so definitely we can't do this. Now, Trump wanted to weaken the dollar, but I don't think he wanted to weaken it like this and to this extent. And people have already been harping on the fact that he said he wanted to be the peace president, but now he's the war president. And it's just kind of silly. So all of this, so who's right and who's wrong, right? That seems to be the big question. Who's right and who's wrong? And that would be a question of morality, right? And people like to always claim that their sense or their conviction of what is right should be everyone's conviction of what is right. That's just basically the way things are. That's the way people are wired. And unless your culture is that you leave other people alone, you are going to insist, you're going to double down, you're going to protest, you're going to destroy property, etc. But how do we determine who, in fact, is right or wrong? Which beliefs, which choices are, in fact, better than others, right? And what people don't realize is they don't know how to calculate and figure out who is wrong. I always say that you can believe something is right, but if the cost of maintaining that belief, all things, everyone being free to walk away, disagree, whatever. So there are no rules at this point, right? This ideal situation. So it's an anarcho-capitalist situation where there are no rules. Well, then how do you figure out what's right and wrong? Well, if the cost of maintaining that belief becomes too expensive, then you are forced to change. You're forced with a choice, and most people will opt to change. I gave a couple examples way back. I can't even remember what the context was, but there are two examples I love to give, and I'll share them with you again. So let's just pretend the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, right? Traditionally racist organization, right? The Grand Wizard, the leader, wants to buy a car, but he does not want a car that was touched by a person of color. Yes, it's hyperbole, it's an exaggeration, but let's just pretend this is something that might happen. So he says, I'm such a pure racist that I don't want a car that was ever touched by a person of color, a Jew, a Catholic, etc., etc. Well, a dealer might say, sure, I can set that up, but the car will be, call it $8 million. So the Grand Wizard of the KKK says, okay, that's a little bit too rich, so it doesn't matter who touched the car. Just give me what you got. Right. And so in order to stay true to his supposed belief, it's too expensive. And so, therefore, that person must compromise, must sort of bend the rules in order to have a car to drive in. Okay, a little bit more realistic example. I had a student once, and I was talking about this, about purchases, that we should be free to make purchases according to our desire. Like you can't force someone to buy something they don't want to buy at the price they don't want to pay. And I had a student who objected, and they say, well, not objected, but she said, can you explain what my dad does? Right. So obviously she was an extreme liberal student before she took when she took my class, but all the arguments that I was making in class were making sense to her. And obviously, her father was a Democrat, right? Believed in Democrat issues and stuff. She said that her dad always told her to buy local, right? Don't buy from the big box stores because, it's corporate greed, blah, blah, blah. So, but then she said, but every time before he goes out to buy something, he checks the paper. Why does he do that? Right? She honestly asked me, and I got to tell you, she was really bright. She was really smart. And she looked like someone who you would think would just scream in your face all day long. But so I give her credit for being open-minded. But she couldn't figure out why her dad did that. And I chuckled and I said, he wants to see how expensive his integrity is. And she looked at me like, what are you talking about? So he's going to go out to the local store at mom and pop store and buy a TV. But he wants to know how much more money he's going to be spending in order to do that. He wants to see how much he is sacrificing in order to maintain his beliefs. So he's checking the paper. How much is that exact TV going to be at a big box store? And so therefore, how much more am I going to have to spend at the local store? And so either his father is going and then haggling, which I don't think he would, but he just really just wants to check how expensive are my beliefs. Now, and then so I gave her a scenario. I said, let's just pretend it'll never be like this, but let's just pretend that your father is going to buy a TV and it's $10,000 at the local store, but at the big box store, it's 5,000. At that point, is he going to say, "Oh, just going to buy local anyway?" Right? You see what I mean? So there is a point, maybe he'll dish out the extra 5,000 to buy that TV. But most people will say, forget it. It's just too much. And so most people have a price point or a level where it's just too expensive. And so they have to change their morals. They have to change what they believe. The people who never change are the fanatics. And those are the people who are willing to go down with the ship, right? Down to the grave, whatever, because their belief is more important than even themselves. So it's kind of like religion, right? Knowledge, or even religion too. If you look at religious belief, knowledge of cost can help you with interpretation of scripture, right? So if you have a bad economic understanding, then you can live with a really bad interpretation of scripture, right? So knowing economics raises your understanding. It happened to me, I never understood all of the gold and silver passages in scripture. And then I understood, once I started understanding economics. And so we share this information so that people have more information with regard to cost. It enables people to make better choices. If you live in a society that's isolated, where there's little change, morality becomes set. And given the closed nature of the society, you begin to have what's called tradition or the old ways. But whenever there's change, like foreigners that move in, or people that lived in your community moved away and then they came back, they introduce different ideas and values then are challenged. You have the traditionalists who say, well, the old ways were always better. But if you let people choose what they want to do, right? Everyone has to reassess costs, especially remember, we're talking about a society where there are no rules, right? There's no government that can impose authority and morality on everyone. Otherwise, there would be a penalty that is incurred. In it, not if you don't, right, not having that, well, then the culture will change, the traditions will change. And people get to talk about, oh, back in the day, this is what we used to do. Immigration does this, right? So immigrants who come to the United States, more often than not, they had to change their culture because the cost of maintaining it was just too high. And the way that you circumvent this is you capture the government, right? You take over the government and then you start passing rules which normalize your old society culture. But keep in mind, why are they in this country? Because the old ways bankrupted them. And so why come into this country? How can you do that here? Well, because we have welfare here, right? And so it takes away a lot of the cost of the choices that people make, right? And so we have to realize that in a free society, you are able to sift out good and bad cultural practices very, very quickly. So how do you measure cost? You do it through economics. So the school of thought that you subscribe to is really, really important. And I've said before, there are many different schools of economics, I'm sure. There's probably individuals' economic understanding, right? Like Bob's understanding of economics, uh, or uh, a school of economics which not only explains your wants and desires, but the interaction of your wants and desires with everybody else's wants and desires, right? So it's not you don't choose your economics based on what justifies what I want best, right? And you want a school of thought which explains human action the best. It's not an interpretation or economic school that enables me to do what I want, but something which explains everything that has happened in the past and what is happening now, what is tried and true. Keynesian economics, for example, only enables big government to do what it does, but it cannot explain why there's always economic bubbles and collapse. Right. And think about it, Keynesian economics or communist economics. It only really works well in wealthy countries. And it doesn't work in poor countries because there's no wealth to begin with for you to steal and to confiscate and to coercively take away. So, for example, why didn't it work in Zimbabwe? Why did it work in the United States and not Zimbabwe? Well, because America was wealthy when they first started going down this socialism road. And also, we have reserve currency of the world. That's why the United States has been running on fumes for a lot longer than it should have. So, thus, looking at it this way, if what you want to do is not economically viable, that is sustainable, then it is immoral, right? You can choose to marry anyone you want, and if your standards are really, really high, then the only problem is that you just don't get married. Now, there's not a morality thing there, right? And if you want to get married, you just simply lower your standards, right? Um, so that's your choice. It really doesn't have much to do as society-wide impact, right? But even the choices within your marriage, it's the same deal, right? You got to figure out, oh, okay, what's economically viable? Either the marriage is able to continue or it just falls apart, right? And this is where I always say, if you're in an argument with your spouse, look for better choices, right? Not, okay, this time you win and then I lose. You come up with a choice number C, choice number three, or a door number three, an alternative which is better than both of your choices. And so you make winning a non-issue, right? Oh, I won the argument. Rather, keeping the peace becomes the priority. Okay. And so, if, however, what you want is economically unviable, when are we talking about that? Well, not only is it talking about cultural values, but war. War is always going to be the worst choice, right? And we're not talking about self-defense, right? Because other people are aggressing against you, and so you have no choice. You have to engage. But then how you engage is then always the day-to-day choice that you have to make. But war in general is extremely destructive. You have industry hell bent on producing weapons that'll just blow up and murder and kill other people, right? Instead of making products that are good for consumers that improves people's quality of life, right? So instead of making a refrigerator, you're making a bomb. Oh, great. And what is the bomb going to do? Well, it's going to destroy things and infrastructure in other countries and kill people. And so there are no benefits which would outweigh peace and free trade. There's just none. You can make an argument till you're blue in the face, but war is always going to be the worst option. And people who keep suggesting it, well, as a good option, yeah, those are the people of either of low intelligence or they have an agenda. And war is the way they are going to achieve it. So individuals, when you're making choices, right, there's that thing where you're like, if you go to war with someone else, well, you're going to realize that, right? So some of the people who do engage in those fights with other people, one person always loses, and sometimes both of them lose. And so, but both people should realize that the fight itself was a bad choice, right? And so, what you start doing in the future is you try to avoid those confrontations, those kind of, in other words, you learn how to de-escalate either by controlling your own emotions or knowing how to say the right things to calm people down. Governments, however, are socialistic in nature. And what I mean by that is they make choices for everybody and make everyone pay for them to spread around the liability, to spread around the cost, whereby forcing all of us to have to pay, even if we don't want to. So if Trump takes us to war in Iran, that's his unilateral decision. That's his choice. But who's going to pay? Right? All the people who want him not to do that. And see, that's the thing. He's sitting there, he's so bombastically saying, yeah, this is what we should do, knowing full well that no one in his family is going to go overseas. Like if he was told, well, if you declare war, your son, Barron, he has to be on the front lines. Do you really think that he'll say the same thing? I don't think so, right? He says these things knowing full well that the only people who will die are people that he doesn't know. And so he doesn't really care. And so governments are socialistic in this way. They force other people to pay when they themselves do not have to. Or in a situation that we're looking at today, Israel only attacked Iran because they know they control the United States government and the US will come to their aid. There are apparently rumors, or I've seen posts where Netanyahu is begging for help, right? Because the response by Iran is far greater than they expected. I'm not surprised one bit, which makes you wonder, well, how much are they of this is a lie that, yeah, they knew, but they were also counting on the fact that the United States would join the war. So collectivism, government, socialism, all this, they impose a morality on all of us because it's too expensive, but they impose it on us and force us to have to pay for it. Trump was literally elected to stop wars. There are several really high profile people who have said this. Justin Amash, you got Ben. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name, but he is still an investigative reporter. Uh, yeah, blanking on his last name, but I think you know who I mean. Um, and and Dave Smith too, right? So he should keep that promise. That promise is the promise that he really should keep. My wife thinks his son-in-law, Kushner or whatever his name is a sleeper agent for Mossad, and that his daughter is being held hostage, right? Like that if he doesn't do what he's being told to do, which is go to war with Iran, then his daughter will bite the bullet. Look, you know, I already pre-told my family, look, if it comes from doing a choice, someone does that to me, and I said this years ago, decades ago, that if I was given this choice, I have to make the right choice, right? Because that is far more important to keep your integrity. And I made sure everyone in my family understood that that's what is most important. But obviously, maybe for Trump, if that's the case, then sure, no, he doesn't have that kind of integrity. I think it's more of his mental decline, right? So Daniel McAdams today in the Ron Paul podcast, he said that his posts are unhinged. Well, to me, that's his mental decline. He was shot at. That would piss off anyone enough that he says, okay, scorched earth, let's do it. Come at me, but I am going to do this. I even said to my wife, if that was true and he and Trump knew, then he'd have him arrested, right? He'd round up all the Mossad agents here that are leaning on all of the people in Congress, That's the way I would do it anyway. But I'm not sorry I voted for Trump because there are some silver linings. Right? Harris, right? Like, so if you remember when Trump got shot, and he was supposed to be dead, he was supposed to be. And it came out that military assets were already on the move towards the Middle East the day before, right? And it takes a while to mobilize all these people. So I think it was all part of a greater plan, right? And Trump not dying, well, they just rolled with it. They made adjustments, and now the attack that would have happened months ago is happening now. And we got Doge because Trump was elected, right? And so a lot of people were able to see all of the corruption and the waste and the fraud. And also, it came out too that with the election of Trump, the overwhelming majority of people in America want peace, no matter what country is involved. And so that's something that the bright side of what we should look, the silver linings, I should say. But otherwise, we got to strap it in because the road to freedom never looked so bumpy. Talk to you next time. Stay safe.